The encounter. The quiet hum of JFK International Airport seemed to fade into the background as Vanessa Mitchell navigated through the bustling terminal. The sound of footsteps, rolling suitcases, and faint conversation swirled around her, but Vanessa's mind was laser-focused. Her heels clicked purposefully on the sleek marble floors, the sound echoing through the high ceilings as her tailored navy blue suit swept behind her. She was a woman on a mission. As she walked, the air felt electric with anticipation. Her heart raced not just because she was about to board a flight to Los Angeles, but because she knew that what awaited her could change the future of her business and her life. Vanessa's company, Sky America, was on the verge of a major expansion, and this meeting with investors could secure a multi-million-dollar deal that would make her one of the most influential women in aviation. Her business wasn't just about providing a means of travel. It was about redefining the skies, creating a space where diversity was celebrated and excellence wasn't determined by who you were, but by what you brought to the table. She had worked tirelessly to make Sky America a success, and now, as its owner and CEO, the company stood as a testament to her dedication, intelligence, and resilience. Vanessa had been through more than her fair share of challenges, navigating systemic barriers, dealing with prejudice, and overcoming stereotypes. Yet, she had never allowed any of it to deter her from her goal. Tonight was no different. As she neared the first-class check-in counter, Vanessa adjusted her posture, straightened her shoulders, and raised her chin, an instinctual move that came with years of experience. She could feel the stares, some curious, some judgmental, and others outright dismissive, but she didn't let them faze her. She was used to the looks, the whispers, the slight hesitation in people's actions when they realized who she was. It was always the same, but this time, she was determined to rise above it all, to show that she was not to be underestimated. The check-in desk came into view, and Vanessa's steps slowed slightly as she prepared for what was next. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged man wearing a standard airline uniform. His name tag read Robert Stevens. As she approached, he barely glanced up from the computer screen, his face set in a neutral expression. Vanessa had always been aware of how people like Robert, the ones who seemed to only do the bare minimum, often acted when they encountered someone who didn't fit their preconceived notions. They were wary, dismissive, and at times, outright hostile. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, his voice lacking warmth. He didn't even look up. "Economy check-in is over there." He gestured toward the far end of the terminal, where a long line of passengers waited in front of the economy desks, their tired faces betraying the exhaustion of travel. Vanessa's brow furrowed slightly, but she remained composed. She could feel the irritation building within her. This wasn't the first time someone had made assumptions about her based on how she looked, but she refused to let it show. She had been in similar situations too many times before. The subtle prejudice, the questioning of her worth and place in spaces she had every right to occupy. "I know where the economy check-in is," she replied coolly, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "But I don't need it. I'm flying first class." She slid her boarding pass across the counter with a practiced motion, followed by her passport, her fingers tracing the edge of the passport as if to remind herself of her own accomplishments. Robert's fingers froze for a brief moment as they brushed the edge of the boarding pass. For a fleeting second, he looked at her, not with interest, but with the kind of guarded suspicion that made Vanessa's heart sink. It wasn't new to her, this feeling of being scrutinized, evaluated as though she were something to be doubted. He finally picked up the ticket, his eyes flicking to the printed text, then back to her face. His expression shifted. Just a slight change, but enough for Vanessa to catch it. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and his smile faltered, replaced with something that looked like uncertainty, maybe even skepticism. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said slowly, his tone tinged with condescension. "But are you sure this is your ticket?" Vanessa's lips pressed together, a quiet breath escaping her chest. A familiar wave of frustration surged within her. but she controlled it. This was part of the game, part of what she had to face every single day. The subtle questioning of her place in the world. "Yes," she said firmly, her voice calm and unyielding. "I'm very sure." Robert hesitated, his fingers lingering over the ticket as though searching for something, anything, to disprove the validity of the boarding pass. His eyes flicked back up to her, as if assessing whether she truly belonged in a first-class seat. He exhaled through his nose, clearly not convinced. "This is for seat 2A," he pointed out, his finger hovering over the printed seat number on the ticket. Vanessa tilted her head, meeting his gaze with an unwavering stare. "Yes, I'm aware," she replied, her tone smooth, but edged with an undercurrent of frustration. "Is there an issue?" A small, humorless chuckle escaped Robert's lips, a sound that reeked of disbelief or perhaps judgment. "That's first class," he remarked flatly, as if he were reminding her of a fact she didn't know. Vanessa's eyes flicked down briefly, scanning the airline logo on the top of the counter. She felt the weight of the moment settling in, the tension thick in the air. The situation was absurd. Here she was, a successful businesswoman and owner of the airline, yet Robert seemed to think her place was not in first class. "I know it's first class," Vanessa said evenly, a slight edge creeping into her voice. "Please, just check the system again." She forced herself to take a deep breath, keeping her emotions in check. She had worked too hard to let this moment shake her. Robert's lips tightened into a thin line, but he nodded reluctantly. He turned his attention back to the computer screen, his fingers typing with exaggerated slowness, tapping at the keys as if trying to buy himself time, as if the act of checking the system was more difficult than it should have been. Minutes passed. The line behind Vanessa grew longer, and she could hear the soft murmur of voices rising, impatience beginning to build in the air. It wasn't just her who felt the time dragging. It was the others too. Finally, Vanessa could no longer keep quiet. The weight was unbearable, and she couldn't understand why Robert seemed so intent on dragging this out. "Is there a problem?" she asked again, her voice a little sharper this time. Robert let out an exaggerated sigh, his breath audible as he let his frustration show. "It's just that I don't see a confirmation under this name," he said, almost as though he was explaining something to a child. Vanessa's jaw tightened, her temper flaring just beneath the surface. "That's impossible," she said firmly, her voice unwavering. "The reservation was made through my corporate account." Robert didn't seem convinced, his brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and disbelief. He looked at Vanessa for a moment longer, then turned to the young woman working the next counter. The way he turned his back on Vanessa felt dismissive, as though she were not even worth the trouble of being engaged with further. "Jessica," Robert called over his shoulder, "can you take a look at this?" Jessica, a young blonde woman, sauntered over with a look of indifference on her face. She barely spared Vanessa a glance before snatching the boarding pass from Robert's hand, her actions sharp and dismissive. The way she handled the ticket, quickly, without much care, told Vanessa everything she needed to know. As Jessica glanced at the boarding pass, Vanessa stood her ground, refusing to let herself be intimidated by the subtle arrogance in the air. This was her moment, her opportunity, and she would not let it be stolen from her. The tension builds. Jessica's eyes skimmed over the boarding pass as if it were a mere piece of paper, her fingers tapping it lightly as she glanced up at Vanessa with barely concealed disinterest. Her platinum blonde hair was pinned back in a tight ponytail, and her uniform was perfectly pressed, but her demeanor seemed to radiate a quiet superiority, the kind that comes from working in an environment where power dynamics were rarely questioned. Vanessa didn't flinch. She knew what was happening. She had seen it before, seen people like Jessica take one look at her, then glance back at the ticket with that faint, mocking smile that was often reserved for people they believed didn't belong in their world. "Is there a problem?" Vanessa asked again, her voice calm but sharp, cutting through the uncomfortable silence between them. Jessica, still holding the boarding pass, glanced at Robert for a moment, then looked back at the computer screen, her fingers hovering over the keys. It was clear she was stalling, though whether it was out of genuine confusion or something else entirely was difficult for Vanessa to decipher. "No problem," Jessica said, her tone flat. "I just need to confirm something in the system." A beat passed as Jessica clicked through the computer's interface, her eyes flicking up to Vanessa's face with an expression that bordered on dismissive. Vanessa noticed the tiny shift in Jessica's posture, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the barely perceptible tightening of her lips. She was being judged, and it was happening all over again. It wasn't the first time someone had questioned her place in a space that she had earned every right to occupy. The hum of the airport grew louder in Vanessa's ears as the seconds ticked by. The distant murmur of travelers, the clacking of heels and the rustling of luggage, all seemed to fade into the background as she focused on Jessica's movements. The young woman seemed to take her time, tapping on the keyboard with an almost theatrical slowness. Robert, who had returned to his spot at the counter, was watching this unfold with a strange, almost amused expression. It was as if he were waiting for something to happen, as if he believed this would somehow resolve itself in a way that put him in the right. Vanessa's mind was racing. She had dealt with similar situations before, but something about this was different. This wasn't just a routine encounter with a clueless airline employee. It felt like a deliberate test, a subtle game of power and control, one that Vanessa was determined not to lose. "Are you sure you have the correct reservation?" Jessica asked, finally breaking the silence, her tone dripping with skepticism. "I'm seeing multiple bookings under Sky America, but none of them match this name." Vanessa's pulse quickened, a flash of frustration sweeping over her, but she pushed it down. She had to stay calm. She had to maintain control. "I assure you, the reservation was made under my corporate account," she said firmly. "I am Vanessa Mitchell, CEO of Sky America. This is my flight. There's no mistake." Jessica's gaze flicked to Robert, then back to the screen, her fingers pausing midair before continuing to type with deliberate slowness. It was clear that both of them were struggling to reconcile the situation in their minds. Vanessa could practically see the gears turning in their heads, the confusion, the doubt, the disbelief that someone like her could possibly belong in the first-class section of a flight. Vanessa took a step forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor with authority. "If you need further verification, I can provide it," she said, her voice now unwavering and cold. "But I won't stand here for much longer while you question my legitimacy." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything felt suspended in time. Vanessa's calm, commanding presence seemed to settle over the situation like a weight, and she could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Robert hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, and Jessica's expression faltered for a split second, just long enough for Vanessa to see the crack in their confidence. Finally, Jessica looked at her with a forced smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll have to check with my supervisor," she said, the words coming out flat and devoid of any sincerity. "Please wait here for a moment." Vanessa nodded, her gaze steady as she watched Jessica walk away, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. As soon as Jessica turned her back, Vanessa's mind raced, the frustration she had been holding and rising to the surface. It wasn't just about the ticket. It was about the assumption, the immediate doubt cast on her identity, the subtle racism and classism that was being wielded against her. She could feel the stares of the people in line behind her, the impatience building, but none of them knew what she was dealing with. None of them could understand the weight of the moment, the toll it took to navigate spaces where she was often treated as if she didn't belong. Robert shifted uneasily behind the counter, his fingers drumming absently on the desk. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly as she regarded him, her expression unreadable. She had dealt with people like him before, the ones who were too scared to stand up for what was right, the ones who let their biases influence their decisions without ever realizing the harm they were doing. She wasn't angry, but she was disappointed. Disappointed that this was still happening. Disappointed that, despite all her accomplishments, she was still forced to prove her worth. The minutes felt like hours as she stood there, waiting. The airport's sounds seemed to grow louder in contrast to the growing tension she felt in the pit of her stomach. The more she thought about the situation, the more absurd it became. She wasn't just any passenger. She wasn't some random traveler who had simply purchased a ticket. She was the owner of the airline, the very company that had made this flight possible. And yet, here she was, standing in front of two employees who couldn't seem to fathom the idea that a black woman could be in their first-class cabin. Vanessa glanced at the clock on the wall behind the counter, watching the seconds tick by as Jessica disappeared into the back office. It was clear that she had to make a choice now. She could wait and hope this situation resolved itself, or she could take matters into her own hands. Her instincts told her that this wasn't going to resolve itself quietly. The system was broken, and if she didn't take a stand now, it would continue to perpetuate this kind of discrimination. The thought struck her like a lightning bolt. This wasn't just about her. This was about everyone who had ever been treated as if they didn't belong, everyone who had been forced to prove their worth simply because of how they looked, what they wore, or where they came from. Vanessa took a deep breath and made a decision. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She would not let this slip by unnoticed. She would make them see her power, and understand who she was. She turned her gaze toward the door to the back office where Jessica had disappeared. There was no turning back now. She would make them understand. The revelation. The minutes stretched on as Vanessa stood still in the crowded terminal, her heels clicking on the smooth floor, a rhythmic reminder of her unyielding resolve. The tension in the air was palpable. The hum of the airport seemed to fade, leaving only the intense silence that enveloped her and the two employees at the check-in counter. She was waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge her presence, to offer an explanation, or at the very least, a sign that this absurdity would soon come to an end. The seconds seemed to drag, and Vanessa's patience was wearing thin. Her sharp eyes followed Jessica's retreating figure into the back office, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a simple misunderstanding. She had flown countless times in the past, many of them on this very airline, Sky America, the airline she had built from the ground up. Yet here she was, being treated as if she didn't belong in a seat that was rightfully hers. She could feel the stares of the other passengers behind her, the faint rustling of their impatience as they waited for the line to move. But Vanessa didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that her worth wasn't defined by the judgment of others, but that didn't mean she would stand idly by when it was being questioned so blatantly. She wasn't just some passenger with a ticket. She wasn't even just a CEO. She was the embodiment of the dream of overcoming the odds, of breaking through the glass ceiling, of proving that people like her belonged in the spaces that others had always reserved for themselves. The door to the back office opened with a soft swish, and out stepped Jessica, her posture stiff and businesslike. She was followed by a man in his mid-50s, dressed in a dark blue suit with a white shirt, and an expression that could only be described as a mixture of confusion and thinly veiled disdain. His name tag read Richard Donovan, and he walked with an air of authority that instantly put Vanessa on guard. Richard's eyes scanned the terminal briefly, landing on Vanessa with a flicker of recognition, before turning to Jessica. "What's the issue here?" he asked in a tone that was more clipped than concerned, his voice carrying just a hint of condescension. Vanessa could tell by the way he approached the situation that he wasn't coming in to resolve a problem but to manage it. He didn't seem to be interested in understanding the full picture. He was more concerned with keeping the situation under control in the most expedient way possible. "Sir," Jessica said, her voice still lacking any real warmth, "there's been a discrepancy with this passenger's ticket. She claims to be flying first class, but the reservation doesn't seem to match our records. We've tried verifying it, but there's no confirmation under her name." Richard turned his attention to Vanessa, his eyes briefly scanning her appearance. His gaze lingered longer than necessary on her tailored suit, the gleaming diamond earrings that sparkled under the overhead lights, and the subtle confidence that radiated from her as she stood tall, unflinching under his scrutiny. "I see," Richard said slowly, as if carefully measuring his words. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but could you tell us your name again? We just need to make sure everything's in order." Vanessa didn't flinch at his condescending tone. She straightened her back and stared him down, her voice steady but laced with authority. "Vanessa Mitchell," she said, enunciating every syllable clearly. "I am the CEO of Sky America, the airline you work for. I am flying in first class, on my own airline, on a seat that was booked under my corporate account. I expect you to handle this with the professionalism it deserves." For a split second, Richard's face softened. His expression shifted, a fleeting moment of realization passing through him as the weight of her words sank in. The arrogance that had been present in his posture faltered slightly, replaced by a look of uncertainty. But it was only for a moment. He quickly masked it with a forced smile, a gesture that could hardly disguise the awkwardness of the situation. "I see," he repeated, this time his voice slightly more cautious, but still laced with the same air of superiority. "However, our system is showing discrepancies. Let me just take a look myself." Vanessa fought to keep her irritation in check. She had dealt with this kind of behavior before, people who would only listen once they had been confronted with undeniable proof. She wasn't angry, not exactly, but the situation was maddening. How many times had she been underestimated, overlooked, simply because of the color of her skin or the way she carried herself? This was no different. Richard moved to the counter, his fingers dancing across the keys of the computer with a brisk efficiency that seemed to mask the growing tension between them. Vanessa watched him carefully, her jaw set with determination. It wasn't just the blatant disrespect that irked her, it was the assumption that she would somehow bow down, apologize for the inconvenience, and quietly accept whatever judgment they passed down. And she wouldn't. As Richard typed, Vanessa's eyes flicked back to Jessica, who was standing off to the side, nervously twisting her hands together. Jessica had been complicit in this charade, unwilling to question the assumptions that had been made. But now, as Vanessa locked eyes with her, Jessica seemed to shrink, her posture slightly less confident. The shift wasn't obvious, but it was there, a subtle recognition that she might have underestimated the person standing before her. Richard turned back to Vanessa, his face a bit less composed than before. He cleared his throat. "It seems there was an issue with the system update," he said, his tone slightly more subdued now. "I'm terribly sorry for the misunderstanding, Ms. Mitchell. Your reservation is confirmed. Please, go ahead to the lounge. Your seat in first class is waiting." Vanessa held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, allowing the silence between them to stretch out. She wanted him to feel the weight of the moment, wanted him to understand that this wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a reflection of a deeper issue, one that would never be solved by just pressing a few keys on a keyboard. With a nod, she turned on her heel, her heart still pounding with the adrenaline of confrontation. As she walked past Richard and Jessica, she couldn't resist the urge to speak once more. "Next time," she said, her voice cool but firm, "perhaps you should take a little more care in questioning who belongs in first class." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Jessica, for the first time, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Neither of them said anything as Vanessa walked away, her footsteps echoing in the vast terminal. As she entered the private lounge, Vanessa couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. She had navigated the situation with grace, but more importantly, she had made a point that went far beyond this single flight. She had reminded them, and everyone else who had witnessed this moment, that people like her had every right to be in those spaces, to occupy those seats, and to make their voices heard. But this was only the beginning. The real challenge, she knew, lay in making sure that the people who had doubted her that day would never forget who she was, or what she represented. The tipping point. As Vanessa settled into the plush leather chair of the Sky America lounge, she exhaled deeply, trying to shake off the lingering tension from the incident at the check-in counter. The lounge was peaceful, a haven from the noise and chaos of the airport terminal. She reached for the glass of chilled, sparkling water that had been placed in front of her and took a sip, her mind still replaying the uncomfortable exchange with Richard and Jessica. The waiting area was designed to calm the nerves of high-profile passengers like herself. Soothing blue hues, soft ambient music, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an expansive view of the runway. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, but all Vanessa could focus on was the sickening taste of injustice that lingered in her mouth. She had worked tirelessly for years to reach this position, not just for herself, but for the countless individuals who had supported her journey, believed in her vision, and paved the way for others who looked like her. Yet, here she was, reduced to the very same treatment she had endured countless times before, the quiet microaggressions that plagued the corporate world. It wasn't about the ticket. It was about the implicit belief that she didn't belong in those spaces. A soft chime from her phone interrupted her thoughts. The screen lit up with an incoming email notification. She glanced at it absent-mindedly, expecting another mundane update or a request for a meeting. But the subject line caught her attention. Urgent. CEO scandal at Sky America. Her stomach dropped. With trembling fingers, she opened the email. It was from her public relations team, and it was a bombshell. The email outlined a flurry of news stories that had already begun to circulate on social media. A video, shot by a fellow passenger at the airport, had gone viral. It showed the entire interaction at the check-in counter, the moment when she had been treated like an imposter, the subtle humiliation she had endured, the employees' doubt toward her. The video was now being shared across platforms, with hundreds of thousands of views and commentary. Vanessa's heart raced as she read through the comments. The majority were supportive, voicing outrage at the way she had been treated, condemning the airline staff for their behavior. But among the waves of sympathy, there were the inevitable voices of dissent, skeptics who questioned whether the situation had really unfolded the way Vanessa portrayed it. There were whispers of her being too sensitive, of her overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. Some users even questioned her legitimacy, suggesting that her status as a CEO was just a fortunate coincidence. She closed her eyes, taking a steadying breath. This was not how she had envisioned her evening. The viral video was out there, and it was only a matter of time before the media picked it up. She had been thrust into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. But Vanessa wasn't someone who shied away from challenges, and she wasn't about to let this define her. She set her phone down, resolving to confront the situation head-on. She wasn't just a CEO. She was the owner of Sky America. And it was time she reminded everyone of that. Before she could formulate her next move, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message from her assistant, Tara. Vanessa, urgent. Richard Donovan just sent a message to your office, apologizing for what happened at the airport. He said he wants to meet with you as soon as you land in Leh. It's marked as urgent. Vanessa's brow furrowed. This sudden change in tone was odd. Just a few hours ago, Richard had been dismissive, if not outright condescending, and now he was apologizing. Why? What had changed? Set up the meeting. I'll be there as soon as I land, she replied. Her mind was racing with possibilities. She wasn't sure whether she should be relieved or more suspicious. The apology could have been genuine, but given the video's viral status and the growing backlash against Sky America, there was a real chance that Richard was simply trying to protect himself from further fallout. Either way, Vanessa wasn't about to let him off the hook without a conversation. The seconds ticked by, and Vanessa's resolve hardened. She could feel the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about a single incident. It was about something much bigger. It was about representation, about how Black women, especially those in positions of power, were often overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. Vanessa had always known that the journey to success would be fraught with obstacles. She had faced countless challenges, some overt, others more insidious. But every time someone tried to hold her back, she fought harder, pushing through the barriers that were erected before her. And this time, things would be no different. She wasn't going to let one misstep derail everything she had worked for. The flight to Los Angeles was a blur. Vanessa kept her mind occupied by the upcoming meeting with Richard, mentally preparing herself for whatever he might throw at her. She reviewed the emails that had come through, making sure everything at Sky America was running smoothly, and read through the growing pile of messages about the incident. Some were offers of support, others were criticisms, but all of them had one thing in common. They centered around what had happened at JFK. As the plane descended toward the City of Angels, Vanessa leaned back in her seat and stared out the window. The sprawling lights of the city below glittered like a sea of stars. Los Angeles had always felt like a place of endless opportunity, a city where the impossible could become possible. She was no stranger to the limelight. But this time, the situation felt different. This wasn't just a corporate meeting or a media interview. This was a reckoning. The world was watching, and Vanessa Mitchell had a story to tell. The wheels touched down with a soft thud, and as the plane taxied to the gate, she mentally prepared herself for the confrontation that awaited her. This wasn't just about correcting a simple mistake. It was about restoring her dignity, reminding everyone, especially those at Sky America, of the power and resilience she had built her career on. Vanessa gathered her things and made her way off the plane, her mind sharp and focused. Richard's apology might have been a first step, but the real work was just beginning. She wasn't going to let anyone forget that she was not only the owner of Sky America, but also a force to be reckoned with. The meeting in Los Angeles. Vanessa arrived at her hotel just after 10 p.m., the city lights casting a soft glow against the sleek glass buildings of downtown Los Angeles. She entered her suite with a deep sigh, knowing that the next few hours would determine the future of her company. After months of preparing for this business venture, everything seemed to come to a head on the heels of an incident that threatened to unravel it all. The viral video, the backlash, and the pressure from Sky America's board of directors had placed her in an unenviable position. As she unpacked her things, her phone buzzed with another notification, a text from Tara. "Richard is waiting in the conference room. He's alone. I've arranged for a full team of lawyers to be on standby." Vanessa stared at the message, her fingers lightly gripping the edge of the phone. The urgency in Richard's request felt odd, considering how dismissive he had been at the airport. She had no idea what was going on behind the scenes, but she was determined to find out. She ran her fingers through her hair and checked her watch. The meeting was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, but she couldn't bring herself to rush. This wasn't going to be a mere conversation. This would be her opportunity to establish control, to make clear that she was no longer someone to be dismissed. She wasn't just there to fix a mistake. She was there to take charge of the narrative, to make it clear that no one, especially not Richard Donovan or anyone else at Sky America, could undermine her. When the time finally came, she walked briskly through the hotel corridor, her heels clicking purposefully against the polished floor. She could feel her heart beat steadily in her chest as she approached the conference room. The door was slightly ajar, and as she stepped inside, she was greeted by the sight of Richard sitting at the long mahogany table. His posture was tense, hands folded neatly in front of him. He didn't stand up as she entered, which only solidified the distance that had grown between them. "Good evening, Vanessa," Richard said, his voice uncharacteristically neutral. Vanessa didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a long, deliberate look at him, scanning his face for any hint of sincerity. "Shall we begin?" she asked, her voice calm but with an edge of authority. Richard nodded, tapping a button on his tablet. A screen at the far end of the room flickered to life, displaying the now infamous video from the airport. Vanessa couldn't help but wince as she watched it again, her own image playing out on the screen, showing the humiliating scene at the check-in counter. She had tried to bury the memory, but here it was, displayed for all to see, taking center stage in the conversation she was about to have. "I wanted to talk about this," Richard began, his eyes locked on the screen. There's been a lot of chatter about this video, and I know it's been a difficult situation for you." Vanessa remained silent, refusing to let herself be distracted by the video playing in the background. She had no interest in replaying her pain. She was here for action, not sympathy. "I was hoping to clear the air and offer an apology, both personally and on behalf of the airline," Richard continued, his voice softening. "It's clear that the situation escalated unnecessarily, and I want to take full responsibility for that." Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. The apology was expected. After all, it had been a public relations move, but it felt hollow. She wasn't here to hear empty words. She was here to understand what was going on inside the company and how Richard planned to handle the fallout. "Responsibility," she said sharply, interrupting him. "Is that what you're offering? Because what I saw today wasn't responsibility. What I saw was a complete lack of professionalism, a lack of respect for me, for my position, and for the very values Sky America claims to uphold." Richard seemed taken aback by her bluntness. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but Vanessa didn't care. She wasn't about to sugarcoat her feelings. "You've got an entire team of people, my employees, who couldn't even bother to treat me with the basic courtesy you show every other first-class passenger. And then you expect me to sit here and accept an apology." Vanessa's voice rose slightly, the anger she had been suppressing over the course of the day now bubbling to the surface. Richard cleared his throat, his face reddening slightly. "I understand you're upset, Vanessa," he said, "but what I need from you right now is to hear me out. We need to address this properly, and that means moving past the video. I want to work with you on a solution, not just throw out apologies." The audacity. Vanessa's hands clenched into fists, but she took a deep breath, willing herself to stay composed. This meeting wasn't just about her dignity. It was about the future of Sky America. And she couldn't let Richard's arrogance cloud her vision. "What solution, Richard?" she asked, her tone cutting. "What are you suggesting? That I let this go? That I pretend this never happened?" Richard exhaled, trying to steady himself. "No, not at all. What I'm proposing is that we use this as an opportunity to move forward. We're prepared to make a public apology, not just for the incident with you, but for the way our employees have acted in similar situations. The video will be removed from all social media, and we'll issue a statement. I want to make it right." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "You want to erase the evidence, just like that?" "Not erase," Richard corrected, his voice firm, "but to control the narrative. We can work together to mitigate the damage this has done to your reputation. Your involvement in Sky America is invaluable, Vanessa. You've worked too hard to be disrespected like this." It was a tempting offer. A part of Vanessa considered it. After all, she had built Sky America into a leading force in the industry. But something about Richard's tone, the underlying assumption that he could dictate the terms of their reconciliation, rubbed her the wrong way. "No, Richard," she said, her voice steady. "I will not be a puppet in your little damage control exercise. I didn't get to where I am by letting people dictate my narrative, and I'm not going to start now. If you truly want to make this right, you'll start by admitting the deeper issue at play here." Richard looked at her, his confusion evident. "What deeper issue?" Vanessa leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with him. "The issue is not that your employees made a mistake. The issue is that they assumed I didn't belong in first class. That assumption, based solely on my appearance, is a reflection of the systemic issues within your company. It's a reflection of how black women, even in powerful positions, are often questioned, overlooked, and humiliated." There was a long pause as Richard processed her words. The screen behind him continued to loop the video, but Vanessa was no longer focused on it. She was laser-focused on making sure Richard understood the weight of what had happened and why it couldn't be swept under the rug with a simple apology. "You'll have to do more than issue a public statement," she said coldly. "If Sky America is truly committed to diversity and inclusion, you'll put actions behind those words. You'll make sure this never happens again. And that means real training, real change, and real accountability. Richard shifted in his seat, his posture becoming less confident, more defensive. "What exactly do you want me to do?" he asked, clearly caught off guard by her demands. Vanessa stood up, pacing slowly in front of him. "I want Sky America to make systemic changes. I want to see diversity training rolled out across every department, from the ground crew to the executives. I want you to establish clear protocols for how your staff should treat passengers, especially those who look like me. And I want a commitment that anyone who behaves like Robert Stevens or Jessica Miller will be held accountable." Richard was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was measured. "I'll take this up with the board. We'll look into it." Vanessa stopped pacing and turned back to face him. "You don't need the board's permission to do the right thing, Richard. This is your company too, and I expect you to lead with integrity." With that, she turned on her heel and walked out of the conference room, leaving Richard to contemplate the gravity of the conversation they had just had. As the door closed behind her, Vanessa knew that the battle was far from over, but this time, she was in control.